Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Mrs. Johnston here. It is time for Knowledge and Social Studies. We are in Unit 10, Colonial Towns and Townspeople, and today is Lesson 2, A Trip to Town. Let's review what we learned in our previous read aloud about living in the country during colonial times. What are some of the chores that were done on a colonial farm? Did you say things like milking the cows, making butter, sewing clothes? Who performed these chores? Did you remember that everyone in the family had chores, even the children? Why did people, including children, have so many chores? They had a lot of chores because it was difficult to buy ready made items and the shops were far away. Which chores sounded the most difficult or complicated? Some of you thought that milking the cows was difficult because you had never experienced that before. Some of you said churning the butter because it took a long time. People who lived in the country sometimes traveled to town to pay expert workers, called tradespeople, to do some of this work for them or make some of their work easier to do. Tradespeople became experts in their jobs so that other people didn't have to do these jobs as often at home. For example, dressmakers became experts at sewing dresses so that women could buy dresses from dressmakers instead of making their own dresses. Buying goods in town saved farmers a lot of time because they didn't have to make the things themselves. Today, we still rely on the help of workers who become experts at their jobs so that they can help us do the things that we can't do by ourselves. Some of today's workers work with their hands to make things using specialized tools and knowledge, just like colonial tradespeople. Is a pilot or a tailor a tradesperson? Did you say a tailor? Is a farmer or a toddler a tradesperson? You are correct. A farmer is a tradesperson. Is a baker or a teacher a tradesperson? A baker is a tradesperson. Listen to find out about the different types of tradespeople that lived in colonial towns long ago. Imagine you lived in the country long ago and were preparing to visit the nearest town. A trip to town was not an everyday event or ordinary. 300 years ago, there were no cars or trains. Your parents would have taken you by horse and wagon. And the going was slow because you wouldn't have wanted to leave your animals alone or your crops uncared for at home for a very long time. Trips to town were pretty rare or uncommon. If something is rare, it doesn't happen very often. Why might you have needed to go to town? Did you say things like food that your farm couldn't produce? Tools to fix things in your house or on your farm? Or maybe to get clothing that you weren't able to make? Normally, everyone in your family helped to make the most of what you needed on your farm. But there were always a few things that your family couldn't make themselves, like some iron nails, or a new pair of shoes, or that would have simply taken too much time to make at home, like grinding wheat into flour or making cloth for a new shirt. Fortunately, there were different kinds of tradespeople in town who were specialists or experts at many of these jobs, jobs that couldn't have been done at home or that took too long. How would you have paid these tradespeople for the things you needed? Many of you probably said using money. Farmers usually brought a load of goods to sell. People in colonial times did not use money as often as we do today. Or he might have bartered or exchanged some eggs or butter for the cloth you needed to make new clothes. If you bartered products that you brought from your farm, you swapped or traded what you brought for something you wanted from that tradesperson. You would not pay money. You would trade. Trade means to exchange. You may have brought along some vegetables or even chickens to trade. The first stop on your trip to town, or at least in a large town, most likely would have been at the town square. Most of the shops and important buildings were located in or around the town square. Unlike the country, buildings in town were close together, which made it possible for you to visit several shops on the same day. The town square was the place where the mayor and other town leaders made speeches or important announcements. The town square was also where townspeople met to talk and gossip with their friends. This is how people learned the latest news. From the town square, you probably headed to the nearby trading post or general store. This was where farmers could buy, sell, or trade all kinds of things. At the trading post or general store, you might have traded the vegetables, grains, or dairy products you brought with you for tools, cloth, or supplies that you needed. If you are visiting a typical town in colonial days, here is where your trip to town would end. Most smaller towns had only one general store, a place where farmers could trade their crops to get basic tools and supplies they could not make at home. However, let us imagine that you are visiting a very large town where you could see and do more. If you looked near the river, you may have seen a mill, a building where wheat was ground or crushed between large stones to make large amounts of flour. Mills were almost always on the river because flowing water was needed to turn the huge water wheel that made the large flat stones inside turn and grind the wheat. If you had visited the miller, no doubt you would have brought freshly harvested wheat or corn from your farm for the miller to grind into flour. Once it was ground into flour, you would have been able to take it home to bake bread, cakes, and other good things to eat. Next, you may have stopped in the baker's shop and bought freshly baked rolls and bread. What a treat for your family. Remember how much work it was to make a loaf of bread back on the farm? Sometimes, if farmers had extra money after selling their crops, they may have visited the hatter for a new hat or the dressmaker to buy a new dress for their daughter. Instead of buying cloth, you may just have bought yourself a new shirt from the tailor. A tailor is a person who makes or fixes clothing, and you would have to visit the all important cobbler or shoemaker, who would have made you a new pair of strong leather shoes. The blacksmith was an important specialist in town with his own set of tools and skills. The blacksmith built fires to melt iron so he could pound it into the horseshoes and nails that you needed. He also worked hard to make many of the same metal tools that you needed to use back on your farm. In the busy town, each of the tradespeople and merchants had something special to offer people who lived in the country, just as you had much needed fresh food to offer them. For the next few days, you will be learning more about some of these special people. Describe what you might see in town. Did you come up with some of these answers? You would see a town square, houses, and shops that were close together, or different tradespeople. Why did farmers go into town? Farmers went to town to barter for goods. Why were trips to town rare instead of every day? It was a long trip and farmers didn't want to leave their farms for long. What might a farmer bring to barter or sell in town? A farmer might bring food like milk, cheese, butter, and eggs. A farmer might also bring crops and animals. Where would a farmer go to sell these things? A farmer would go to a trading post or a general store. Why would a farmer go to the mill? A farmer would go to the mill to have the miller grind his wheat or corn into flour. What could a farmer get from a cobbler? A farmer would get shoes. What could a farmer get from a blacksmith? A farmer would get horseshoes, iron nails, and tools. Mrs. Johnston hopes you enjoyed our story called A Trip to Town.